All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to session number 5 of 8 in our Paraeducator series. My name is Kristen Brooks, Executive Director with the Supporting Inclusive Practices Project, along with Kevin and Jessica from our team. We welcome you here today and thank you so much for participating. We'd also like to thank our partners at the California Department of Education for making this series available to folks throughout California at no cost. Jessica's behind the scenes as well as Kevin, and they're going to help with answering questions in the chat, as well as dropping links to the Padlet of resources where this recording, as well as previous and future recordings and resources, will be housed in this series. So keep an eye out for that in the chat. We also have the Q&A available that we'll monitor, but we won't be able to monitor the hand raising feature. It's just kind of a few different things to be monitoring when there are several hundred folks who have registered for today's event. So please continue to access the chat and the Q&A feature. At this time, I'd like to welcome and thank Drs. Tomeno and Miguel for being our presenters for 3 of these sessions in our Paraeducator series, all related to data and behavior. We thank you so much for joining us. You have been amazing partners, and the feedback we receive from your webinars is always stellar. So thank you so much, and take it away.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us. Today, we're going to be talking about data collection, specifically reliable data, and how that can help you in your job. Next slide, please. So what we're going to talk about today is the importance of data collection, what exactly we should be measuring, data collection measures for the classroom, understanding what onset and offset are, embedded practices with each method, and then if we have some time left over, we definitely want to answer any questions that you have. Next slide.
And real quick, because of that embedded practice, if you can have your cell phone handy for the stopwatch on there and maybe just a piece of scratch paper for some simple calculations, that will help you with answering some of the questions that we'll have.
Yeah, that's right. There will be actually interactive work. So hopefully, we're not only just going to be speaking about what to do, but give you the opportunity to actually do it so that you've had some practice for when you go back into your environments. So why do we need data? Well, it's the only objective way to determine baseline. Actual data based on actual behaviors being exhibited or skills being exhibited is the best and really the only way to clearly determine baseline. It's also the only objective way to determine if a student is making progress. So data needs to be ongoing, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But if you take ongoing data, you will definitely be able to see if a student's making progress, or sometimes if they're not making progress and adjustments need to be made. Data is used for all IEP planning. So it doesn't matter what service you're in, whether it's speech, occupational therapy, if you're a behavior analyst, if you're a teacher, or if you're a paraprofessional, all that data that we take day in and day out is definitely crucial for the development of an IEP document. It's also needed to determine placement and abilities of our students. So baseline data tells us where we are, and then it helps us establish where we're going to go. It informs if existing educational programs are effective. It also provides information as to what additional supports are needed for the student to succeed. All right, so what should we be measuring? I think a lot of times when we get reports, if a student's referred or if we're asked to assist in a student's case, one of the things that we often see is data related to only challenging behavior, and specifically the reduction of challenging behavior. What usually we don't see are data measures geared towards skill acquisition goals. And so we want to be really clear here that when we're talking about taking data, we're talking about taking data on the occurrence of skill demonstration, and we're taking data on this, the occurrence of challenging behavior as well. We also want to in the middle there is the demonstration of socially appropriate behaviors. We want to take data on that. And the reason is because there's an equation here, and it's really just math. If we can increase the amount of time that a student is engaged in pro-social behavior or skill sets that are other than challenging behavior, then we've done our job, because there's less time to engage in challenging behavior. So it's always important to monitor skills being learned as well as behaviors impeding learning. Next slide. So data is not about adding more to your plate. Data is about making sure you have the right things on your plate. And I think that this is really important, because if you're coming into this thinking that data is just one more thing to do in the scope of all the things that you do, you might want to change that mindset, because the data that you take is going to tell you what to do. So you'll spend less time wondering what you should be doing. When we have folks come in from other settings and we ask them how they establish their planning or develop their goals, a lot of it is time spent meeting and just trying things, etc. But it's not based on any sort of data metrics. And the data really does make the decisions for you, and it is a much more efficient way for pushing forward for the student. Next slide. So here's the roadmap that we have right now. First, we want to identify the most important skills and behaviors to measure. Then we want to define using observable and measurable terms, all right? So that means that what we see is what goes in the definition. That means that if you write a definition based on what you see, and then I, who hasn't been there, reads that definition, I can see or visualize the same thing. We want to determine the best type and record. So we select which type of data, we develop a manageable system, and then we begin recording. Next thing is consistency. We need to take data in real time, not after the fact, okay? If we're not taking data in real time, I guarantee you it's not accurate. So as a behavior is occurring, as a skill is being demonstrated, we're taking the data. We also want to take it every day. When we take it every day, that means we can compare day to day and establish if there's certain environments or circumstances that relate to higher or lower rates of behavior. And we want to take it all day. Now, I know that in the school setting, we're largely only in control of what happens during school hours, but providing data practices and providing IEP documents and resources and things like that to parents and families, and encouraging them to take data in the home as well is always a great practice. As we're taking data, we want to make sure that we observe the trends. Are they improving or are they not? We want to inform teacher, clinicians, all team members of what those trends are demonstrating. And then we want to see what changes are occurring. The data that we take in real time should be evaluated in real time so that we can make adjustments to improve the trends one way or the other. Next slide. All right.
All right. So what are some common data measures that you can be utilizing in your classrooms that will help you with your students that you're working with? And I want to preface this is not an exhaustive list. There are many, many different types of data depending on the information that you need. But we really wanted to focus this hour on getting you guys practice with the most common types of behavior and the most common types of data and the most useful types of data that you can be using with your students. And those are event recording or frequency. And we're going to go into detail and practice with each of these. So event recording and frequency, the rate of a behavior, the latency, duration, and percent opportunity. And these different types of data can help you with skill acquisition skills or also with behavior reduction goals. Next slide. So the first type of data that we're going to be talking about is event recording or frequency. So what is that? It's simply the count of behavior as it occurs. And this goes back to Edward's point about taking real-time data. I know firsthand at the end of the day, the data that you would take is not as accurate as had you been taking it in real time. So having data sheets, a piece of paper, an iPad that has a data tracking system in it, something near you and with you at all times to take the data in real time. Otherwise, these counts will not be accurate. The dimension of an event recording or a frequency, like I said, is a count. So it's a numerical count. So an example is 5 times. That would be an event recording or a frequency. So an example of this is the number of times the student hit that day when they were at school. When would you want to use this type of data? You would want to use a rate or a frequency count. A frequency count or event recording when you know the topography of the behavior. So that means that you know exactly what it looks like. There's a clear start and a clear finish, and that's easy to know, right? So if it's something like the kid rocking and flapping their hands and there's not really, and then they stop rocking and then they flap their hands, that's going to be much harder than taking frequency data than if it's a quick, clean hit and then it's over. So you want to make sure you know what the behavior looks like and there's a clear start and a clear finish. The behavior occurs for a short duration and that you have, you can use it with low frequency behaviors or high frequency behaviors. You just need to make sure that it's clear if it's high frequency, what the start and finish look like. Next slide. So we're going to do some practice taking a count, and this is going to be one of the fan favorites from last time that we had our videos. We have a couple repeat videos, and we thought that that would be helpful because now you saw it in terms of the behavior perspective, and now you're going to be taking data on those same videos. So in this video, you're going to see the little boy calling out for his mom repeatedly. And I want you guys to determine the frequency or the count. So this is how many times did he call out? And I want to again specify that the topography of the calling out is any loud word being called for attention. If you guys recall the video, I think he says like mama, mom, mommy, and like different words. So all of those count. And just a hint, pay attention from the beginning because the first call out is right when the film starts. Okay, so everybody get your paper. We're going to have a question, a poll after to see if you guys are accurate. So you can start it.
Lewis, 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 Mom, 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 Mommy, 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 Mama, 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 Ma, 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 Mom, 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 Mommy, Mommy, Mama, Mama, Mama.
What?
Hi.
All right. Next slide. And if we can pull up the first polling question. So the frequency of calling out for mother's attention is A, 25, B, 26, C, 27, D, 28, or E, 30. All right. Oh, we still have some coming in. All right. So most people picked 27, and 27 is the right answer. I just want to point out how important understanding those starting and stopping and the topography of the behavior is, because there was a pretty close second for 26. And sometimes I've seen discrepancies even if you take two people's data. I've seen something as extreme as 3 to 36. Like one person thought it was 36 times and one person thought it was 3. So it's really important to understand the start and the finish of a behavior, but I'm really, really happy that most of you guys said 27, and that's what it is. It took me several times to make sure that was the exact number of times, and it was 27. All right, so we will close this poll. The next type of data that's extremely important in the classroom setting is rate. So the rate is similar to a frequency, but it's per a time increment. So it's the ratio of the count or the frequency per observation time. So it's a numerical type of measurement. So something like 5 times per hour. So with a frequency, it's just 5. It happened 5 times. With a rate, you're really looking at 5 times per hour, 5 times per class period, or 5 times per speech session. And with our classrooms and our school settings, oftentimes this is extremely useful information because behavior may look different at lunch or at recess or in, like I said, a speech session or an OT session. And so kind of breaking it down and understanding the number of times it occurs per some sort of temporal dimension. So this is a best measure to use when duration of observation times varies. So something like a minimum day versus a regular school day. If you just did a simple frequency, you couldn't compare those 2 days because they weren't the same length of time. Or if you have like some pull out versus push-in services, those might be different durations of time, and you may need to be classifying that when you're taking the behavior data or the skill acquisition data. So next slide, please. So let's practice with that. So what is the rate of behavior for 10 hits over 5 minutes? And I want a per rate behavior. So again, the rate is the frequency divided by the duration that you're looking at. So what is the rate of behavior for 10 hits over 5 minutes? And we can pull up the second polling question. Awesome. Yes. So 2 hits per minute is the answer because it would have been 10 divided by 5. So that is great. Next slide, we're going to practice one more time. So for our second time practicing, it's a little bit more of a complicated math equation, but I think more consistent with the times of like what a period would be on a school campus. So what is the rate of behavior for 20 hits over 50 minutes? And again, I want the per minute rate. And we can start this polling question. Perfect. All right, I think we have a pretty high majority. Awesome. So yes, the correct answer is 0.4 hits per minute. I do, just so that everybody fully understands the concept, 0.4 hits is not accurate. So answer D is not accurate because it doesn't account for the temporal dimension. So like 0.4 hits would be more of a frequency count. So that's the count of behavior. The 20 hits per minute, that is just too much because it was 20 hits over the 15-minute period. So you have to divide the 20 by the 50-minute period to get the rate. And then it's not 20 hits either because it was 20 minutes over 50 minutes, not just 1 minute. So I hope that helps, but good job. 0.4 hits per minute was the answer. All right, the next type of data is latency. And I think this is a very underutilized and extremely useful type of data. So latency is the time from the presentation of the stimulus or the instruction to the occurrence of the behavior that you're looking for. The dimension of measurement is temporal, so it's a time. So something like 7 minutes, 10 seconds, whatever it may be. So an example would be that the direction is given to touch head, and 10 seconds later, the student touches their head. The latency for that is 10 seconds. A lot of our students, as you know, are non-compliant oftentimes, or have difficulty processing information. And so I use this type of data all of the time to see if I'm getting increased compliance, quicker compliance, and if all of that speech therapy is helping with some of those auditory processing challenges. So it's really appropriate when you're looking at skills such as following instructions or getting a student to comply, or processing delays. When you're looking at, I need the student to follow a 2-step direction, and how long does it take them to start demonstrating that they heard the instruction, they understood the instruction, and then they started doing it. So again, it's the time from the presentation of the stimulus or the instruction, and it can be both, and I'll kind of explain that for this next video, to when they actually do the behavior that you want to see. So this is another fan favorite from our last presentation. And this is a clip of Oliver, who is Dr. Miguel's German Shepherd, and Dr. Miguel. So he wanted to teach his dog to be able to respond to the jar, the ringing of the jar sound, to then know to come and stop and wait for his treat. So this is why knowing the topography is really important, and I'm interested to see what the answers are here. So I want to give you a few hints. So I want you to start your timer for the latency as soon as you hear the first ring of the jar, and then you'll hear him starting to come, and then you'll kind of see a shadow, and then you'll see him coming. So the end of the latency, the behavior we want is him to stop in front of Dr. Miguel and wait for his treat. So as soon as you see him stopping and waiting for the treat, that's when you stop your timer. All right, so let's take the latency for this video. All right, so the latency, and I gave you guys a little bit of a range because I know this is a little bit tricky of when he actually stops. So is it A, 5 to 6 seconds, B, 2 to 3 seconds, C, 26 seconds, or D, 8 to 9 seconds? And we can open the polling question. And E, 1 minute, sorry. Awesome. You guys are so good. It was, I think when I calculated, it was like 8 point something seconds from the time he actually heard the ring to when he walked over and stopped. Now that would be like a stimulus, and any instruction that we give is a stimulus, but in the classroom case, it's oftentimes when the instruction is given. So it's not like they're going to hear a cookie jar ringing. So it would be, you know, Johnny, sit down. And how long it takes him to walk over to his desk and sit down would be the latency. All right, next slide. Okay, this is another really, really, really important type of data that should be collected in your classrooms, and oftentimes I see, or we see, is not, and that is duration. So the duration is the length of time that the behavior occurs. So it's a temporal dimension. So again, something like 7 minutes, 2.4 hours. So an example of this is that a student is engaging in an outburst behavior for 37 minutes. The reason this is so important is if someone told me that my son was having an outburst in class 3 times a day, I would say, okay, well, how long? Because 3 1-minute outbursts is really, really different than 3 hour-and-a-half outbursts. the severity is completely different. And so to fully understand our students' behavior, sometimes just the frequency is not enough, or the rate is not enough. We need to know how often is it occurring and how long is it occurring. So this is really useful when a behavior is not a discrete response. And we're going to talk later about onsets and offset, but sometimes I'm sure you guys can all relate. If a student's having an outburst or a meltdown, they might start to calm down and then re-kick you or re-fling or hit you again. So when was the stop of that? Or like, how, you know, what does that look like? How long is it? So it's, this type of data is really useful when we don't have a clear ending to the behavior, or when we need to know the time of one occurrence of a behavior or the total time or multiple occurrences. So if we want to know, say a student is having a difficult time coming into class, there's too much stimuli, they don't like the lights, there's too much noise, and we have to desensitize them to being in their classroom. We might want to know the total time of multiple occurrences. So the total duration throughout the school day that they were in class as opposed to out of class. So you can use duration for one occurrence or for a total duration of a certain behavior you want to see or get rid of in one full day. So next slide. So we're going to practice again. And this is a funny clip. It's a new one. So I want you guys to watch a video clip of our student, Jimena, who's going to be throwing candy at another student, Edward. And I want you to record the duration. Now the onset, or when the first, what we would consider the behavior first occurring, is when she first launches her first piece of candy. And the offset, when you're going to stop your timer, is when she has listened to the instruction to stop and she has quiet hands. So that's how you'll know when to start and stop your timers. So get your timers out and we will start now.
Jimena, please pay attention. Thank you.
All right, so we can, next slide, and we can open the polling question. So was it A, 20 to 22 seconds? B, was it just one occurrence? C, was it 2 minutes? Or D, 37 seconds? All right, nice job. So yes, she was actually engaging in the behavior for, it was 21 seconds, but I wanted to give you guys some leeway there. The 37 seconds, I don't even think the entire video is 37 seconds. So just, you want to be really, really careful and make sure you know when to start the timer and when to stop. And this is so important because oftentimes it's not the same paraprofessional or the same paraeducator working with a student every single day. So it needs to be really clear what the expectation is. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to compare apples to apples across day, and you won't be, the data will not be useful to you in knowing if the intervention is working, what supports the student needs, or where we're at with the goals. All right. So how do we know that? Like, how do we decide when a behavior starts and when it stops and make sure that that's clear for everybody that is involved in this individual's life? So how we do that is through a different type of data called onset and offset. And the onset is the first sign of the behavior being demonstrated. So for the example of Jimena throwing the candy, I defined it as the first launch, the first time the candy left her hand. But I could have easily defined it as the first time she raises her arm to throw, or the first time the candy hit Edward's back. So depending on how you define it can significantly alter the data that you end up with. And so that's why it's so important to communicate it to all team members. So another example would be the student raises their arm to hit you prior to eloping. That would be the onset of like an outburst. So the student hits you and runs away and starts outbursting. The onset of that behavior is right when they're about to go to hit. The offset is the entire behavior topography is absent for a specified duration. And this is really, really important to get right, so that you don't end up with different counts or different durations depending on who's monitoring the behavior. So an example I used earlier is that the kid might stop engaging in the outburst for a minute and lay down and take a couple breaths and then start hitting you again. Is that two separate outbursts or is it one? And so you really, and it doesn't matter, but you have to define it. And so typically we'll do things like the offset is that the student has returned to their desk and has started complying for 2 minutes. Or if it's an eloper, a student that ran away, the student has returned to the area of instruction and has complied with one demand. And then we know that behavior is over. And then if they run away again, that's a second occurrence.
I think that one of the things you should also take away from this is that if you have been taking data or if you begin taking data and you notice irregularities or contrasting data between yourself and another person or between two different people, or maybe you even hear, oh, so-and-so is just better with that student, that's why the data is low or whatever, always ask, well, how are you taking it? What is your onset? What is your offset? Because those can be very key indicators as to whether or not your data is reliable, just based on the person responding. And chances are, in many cases, when there's such huge disparities, it's because the data is not being taken properly.
And I think it's also important as paraeducators, and I just want to preface that both Edward and I have been in the role of paraeducator for several years also. We've been in the role of teacher, behavior analyst, and now principal. And I think the most important thing is communication. And so as a paraeducator, if your teacher tells you to take data on something, or your BCBA tells you to take data on something, especially like duration type data, I would ask, okay, what's the onset and offset? Or what's the topography of my behavior? What does that look like? So that you're really, really clear on what that is. And chances are your BCBA will be like, whoa, you're a great paraeducator that you need to ask that. At least I would, but I'm kind of a data nerd.
Yes, you would.
So make sure you're asking those questions. Don't be afraid to ask those questions. You're going to leave this training knowing this information. You've practiced it. So make sure that you're asking those questions so you have the information you need to take reliable data. So when are you going to ask for an onset and offset? When you're collecting data on target behaviors, and it's most important, like I've said, for behaviors that don't have a clear start and finish. So things like stereotypy, where the student's rocking and they stop for a minute and they start again. Those outbursts, challenging behaviors, the behaviors that have multiple responses within one behavior. So the kid screaming, hitting, and dropping to the floor all at the same time. Those are all those types of behaviors where you're going to want the onset and offset, because it's not discrete. It's not obvious what the start and the finish is. All right. So why is it important? We've kind of been talking about this, the accuracy of the data. And like I've said, I have seen data sets where it was the exact same data that was supposed to be measured, where someone said it was the 3, and then the inter-rater reliability score was a 37. So very, very different. Or if there's a staff change and you don't communicate with one another, this is how I was taking the data, this is the onset, this is the offset, this is how the behavior is defined. You'll oftentimes see like a huge jump or a huge decrease that isn't actually a real change in what the student's demonstrating. It's a change in how the data was taken when you look at it with further examination, or when you take a closer look. So it's really, really important to take this onset offset data. And you want to know what constitutes the behavior and the ability to compare data across days, times, and team members, like I've discussed.
really, data collection measures should be memorialized in some centralized fashion. Obviously, we have the IEP documents and then the positive behavior intervention plans and things like that. But within the classroom itself, which really is, the heartbeat of the entire thing, data measures, it's so easy to just put the data collection procedures for each student somewhere in the classroom or even at the student's desk or in the folder that you all work from, so that they can be referenced from time to time. And then it's also important too that even if there isn't a lot of staff rotation or whatever, that we remind ourselves of what the data practices are on a daily or weekly basis so that we can ensure our own reliability.
All right, next slide. All right, so that onset offset is really important for the types of data that we already talked about. So another type of data, I think this is probably the most frequently used type of data for skill acquisition or your IEP goals, is percent opportunity or trial-based data. So this is when you're breaking up the learning into various trials and successive trials, and you want to know the number of correct responses. And so the way that you find the percent opportunity would be the number of correct responses over the total number of trials, which you could also add up as correct plus incorrect. It's just the total number of trials or opportunities that were given. So again, it's just a simple division problem. An example would be the percent correct that the student got on a spelling test, or the percent of presented opportunities that the student raised their hand. So every time the teacher says, does anyone have the answer? Every single one of those is an opportunity, and the number of times the student actually raised it would be the correct response. So when do you want to use this? Like I said, in skill acquisition, or when you want to measure what the student is able to do. And it's oftentimes great for IEP goals that you're targeting, and when you're looking at skill building or any type of learning. So next slide. So the response types, you're going to have either incorrect or correct, independent or correct. So the student was able to do the skill independently or correctly as prescribed by the goal. You could have a prompted response. And in our last series, we went over all of the different types of prompts to help your students. So if it's a prompted response, it would be a different classification. And then incorrect. So the only trials that you put on the top of the fraction are the independent or the correct trials, so the pluses. And then you divide that, like I said, by the prompted or the incorrect plus the correct. So an example would be 8 out of 10 trials were correct. So that's an 8 over 10. You do the division and that equals 80%. Next slide. All right, so let's practice. What is the percent correct for the following data set where I equals independent, P equals prompt, and IN equals incorrect? So, or INC equals incorrect. So we have INC is the first trial, P is the second trial, P is the third trial, I is the fourth trial, and I is the fifth trial. So there's your data set, and we can pull up the polling question. What percent correct did this student obtain for this data set? All right, so we have the majority at 40%, and that is correct, but that's only 63 of the respondents. So I just want to go over really quickly for those of you that maybe didn't get it right, how we got that correct. So remember the I's were the independent or correct responses. So on the top portion of your fraction, you would have a 2 because there were only 2 responses that were counted as correct. And then the INC and the 2 P's add up to 3. So there were 3 that were not correct plus the 2 that weren't. So your fraction is 2 over 5, which equals 40% when you do the math. So that's why the answer was 40% and not 25, 20, or 80%. All right, next slide. So we wanted to show an example. You don't need to take data during this example. We just felt that this was a good example of a paraeducator running a goal where she's using percent opportunity, and she talks about some ways that she changes the stimuli or changes her approach to get a correct response. And then she kind of talks you through taking the data also. So we can go to the next slide and start this video.
Hi, my name is Stacy and I'm a CSP here at Portview. We're going to be running his identifying shape goal. And here we go. So with this goal, student has to identify his shapes, and he has circle, triangle, and square. I was using this Velcro that we actually decided to make for him because he was having a hard time looking down and staying focused. So with this, I'm able to elevate the icons, and he's able to stay more engaged in the goal. And he's improved so much just by us changing how we approached and ran the goal. And also when he is having a harder time, the way you can run it is also by changing the settings. So not always doing it on the desk, and also doing it maybe in the library or walking with him because he's a big sensory kid. So with the scoring, what I'm doing is basically I'm presenting the icon and I'm presenting the shapes. And then after I present it, if he touches it the first time correctly, that'll be independent and that'll be a plus. Now, if he touches the incorrect one, the first one it'll be a minus. But what I like to do is I'll pull the icon away just to kind of practice and teach him. So I'll kind of move him to see where his focus is at, like to the top, to the bottom, and just to keep him engaged with the task. Circle. What is this? Circle. Good job. So when he...
All right. So that I think just gave an example of where you might have a prompted response, or you might embed learning into your, while she, holds the shape up here to have him point to it. That's all that learning that goes on, but that doesn't count as a correct. And so that really speaks to what is a trial, and then what are those pluses, what are those minuses, or what are those prompts. And you want it, that's all really important when taking percent opportunity data. And that will significantly impact the score if you're not clear on what a correct or incorrect trial is. So what have we learned? What types of data have we practiced today that you can bring back to your classrooms? We have learned event recording or frequency. So again, that's just the simple count of the behavior. So he hit 5 times today. We have done the rate. So the rate again is the frequency over a time variable. So he hit 5 times per class period, or 5 times per minute. The duration is tied directly to behaviors that are not discrete, that are lasting for a longer time, and you need to understand how long they're lasting for so you can compare and look at the severity of them. So that's, it was 20 minutes or it was a 2-hour behavior. And again, remember that can be one occurrence, or it could be total duration, so that out of class time. Latency, one of my favorites, the time from when the instruction or the stimulus was delivered to when the student actually demonstrated the behavior or skill that you wanted. Percent opportunity, so what percentage of responses to trials were correct. And then onset and offset. So what does the behavior look like to start? When is the behavior actually starting? And when does the behavior stop? All right, next slide. So how it all works, like how does this come together? Again, let's go through that behavior roadmap or that data collection roadmap that we talked about in the beginning. So you want to determine with your teachers, your BCBAs, your school psychologists, what behaviors am I actually targeting? What goals am I targeting? Then you need to decide what type of data collection am I using? And again, what we went through today is not an exhaustive list. If you have questions on a skill that you don't think would have easily mapped onto one of those types of data collection, I think that we're going to have time for some questions, or you can always reach out to us. But once you know what you're measuring, you need to know how you're going to measure it. Then you want to develop a data sheet and have something that's easy, portable, that you can take with you wherever you go. Because like we said, and like Edward said in the beginning, it's extremely important that you're doing this in real time and all day long. So create something that makes sense and is easy. Your school or your teacher might have a preset data sheet that they like to use. Here at our school, we use an electronic platform called Catalyst. It's run by a company called DataFinch. So it's on the iPad and the paraeducators enter it in that way. Just something that works for your classroom, your teacher, and your BCBA, so you all know how to measure what you're measuring. Again, take that data consistently. I cannot stress it enough. Even, paraeducators that I've trained myself and have monitored and watched, I'll go into the classroom at the end of the day, see a blank data sheet. What is this? Well, I remembered. It was 3 times. I remembered what it was. We have great brains and our brains are amazing, organs, but they're not that good. Especially if you've been hit all day, having to take the student to the bathroom, run their academic goals, had to pick up their lunch that they threw all over the place. It's really, really hard to remember, and it's just not accurate. So take the data in real time and then share the data. Data is only as good as what we use it for. And if we as paraeducators are just taking the data and then we're just keeping it to ourselves or keeping it in your students' desks, the IEP team members, yourself as a planning member of that IEP can't do anything with it. So you need to share that data with your teacher so that they know how their student is performing on the goals that they have written or the target behaviors that you all decided were important for them to access their education. And then with that data, when you're talking to your BCBAs and your school psychs and your teachers, this allows us to make data-informed decisions. So we're no longer operating off of, well, I think he needs a one-to-one. He runs out of the classroom all day. I think he needs a one-to-one paraeducator. Or the opposite side of that, he's had a one-to-one forever, but they're so independent now. They're able to sit and do their own goals and do their own progress. Without the data, we can't make educated decision on what our students need. So that is the importance of it. I don't know, Edward, do you want anything to this?
I think something that, maybe many of you not be aware of or have not had experience with is, these students, they have outside medical appointments or maybe nutritionist appointments or the like. And oftentimes parents, relay what's reported by the school in a very anecdotal manner. And one thing about reporting anecdotally is that we don't have any control over the other person's perception of what we just told them. And data allows us to communicate the same thing objectively to ensure that the message is getting across. And why this is so important is I've seen some pretty cool things happen when we've given access to data to psychiatrists, medical doctors, and we're able to discover that internally or something's not right with the student because the doctor says, oh, I had no idea it was like this, and they can make some changes, and then that student's quality of life is improved and they can be included in more things because they're not exhibiting such high rates of behavior. Or maybe there's some dietary changes. You just don't know what the opportunities are, especially if you don't share that data, but you will be pleasantly surprised about what the opportunities are or what comes out of sharing that data. And I encourage you all to do so. Other things you can do with data is practice on each other. This is something I'm known for. If somebody's presenting an IEP and they're saying I'm a lot, I will take data on it. And then I will give them that data. And it's not because I'm trying to be mean, but it's because we don't realize how often we're saying, I've taken data on this one's chapstick use because she didn't believe me how many times she put chapstick on. So it's fun too, right? And that's what it should be. It's a really valuable tool that you can get really fired up about. And we're sharing this with you because we truly believe that it will improve your jobs and it will make you feel as effective as you are.
I also want to just point out that if your student, I know we talked a lot about like IEP goals or target or challenging behaviors. This isn't just for individuals with an IEP or in special education. That percent opportunity, like that is so important. Like I said, for a spelling test or a math test, or how many times a student's raising their hand or initiating a social interaction at recess. There's so many ways that we can incorporate data into all of our classrooms to help all of our students. All right, next slide. So I'm really happy. We don't always have time for questions, so I'm really happy that we do. So I would like to open it up, Kristen, however you want, so that the paraeducators that are with us today can ask any questions that they might have about what we've discussed or things they're experiencing.
Yeah, feel free to enter into the Q&A, participants. That might be the easiest way to get to you. So we have a question. How would data collection work while currently doing online learning, especially if the student has the camera off?
That is a great question. It becomes exponentially harder if the camera is off, especially for some of those like challenging behaviors that you can't observe. So we have been doing distance learning though as well since March. And we take all of the same data that we take in person on Zoom. Now, having said that, when we report it out, we're very clear that the data only represents what was able to be seen on the screen. So if for a screen that was completely blacked out, you would want to be completely transparent about what your data represents and that you weren't able to actually observe the behavior. So, but for verbal skills, if you were like, what's 2 + 2? And the student said 4, you can still mark that as a plus on your percent opportunity. So there's a lot of data that you can take. Like I said, we've been taking data on all of it. And we actually have a study coming out on what that data showed us about distance learning. And we did it all the same way with the same electronic platform. But again, in cases where screens were off, or if a student had an outburst and ran into another room, we noted that, and that what the data that we presented actually represents. That's the most important thing, is explaining what it represents and being completely transparent about that. All right.
Other questions that we're seeing are more specific to signing in. So for those of you participating today, please feel free to reference that Padlet where you can download a certificate of attendance. Since people are from many different districts across California, several hundred folks on board, we don't keep sign-in sheets here. That might be something specific to your school district or your site. So please feel free to check out the Padlet and download a participation certificate. And then Christina, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Kevin.
Edward and Malari, we have another question from Christina. Can you give an example of how you would take data while online when it comes to interacting with their peers?
So we're doing this too. So we run the peers curriculum at Portview. So again, I'm very clear on what the target behaviors are that I want data collected on. So social initiations, responding to someone else, socially initiating to you, duration of a conversation, number of reciprocal exchanges. So the number of time I went from question, answer, question again to keep that conversation going, on topic comments, off topic comments. So for like on topic comments and off topic comments, you can do frequency. You can also do percent opportunity. So how many times did they have the opportunity to make a comment that they actually did correctly? For the duration of a conversation, how long they kept the conversation going, you could do duration. Again, it's how you develop your data sheet, how you define what behaviors you're charting and tracking, and then taking it in real time. I saw another question too about that they were not clear on offset and offset versus duration. And I think that's a really great question that we want to address, but I did a little graph because I'm a visual person. So I don't know if you guys can see me. The onset is when the behavior starts. So how do you define when the behavior actually starts? The offset is how do you define when the behavior actually ends? And the duration is the time in between the two. So the duration is the length of time between when it started and when it ended. The onset offset data is the definition of what it looks like. When does the behavior start? When do I start tracking my data? When do I stop tracking the duration?
Great.
I hope that helped.
The questions are coming in fast and furious now. Here's the next one. Can you clarify about prompting? If you prompt a student before they finally comply, is that not counted on the plus side?
It depends on how, jump in. I'm just like tackling all of these. Sorry. Again, I'm a data nerd, you guys. This stuff makes me so excited. Okay, so it depends on how the target behavior is defined. If the goal is that a student will respond with no more than one prompt, then yes, you can count it as correct. However, if the goal is that the student will independently respond doing whatever, then no, it's a prompt and it counts as a minus in the overall data. Those prompts are really informative and really helpful. So at Portview, we don't chart it as like a P and an incorrect, like a prompt and an incorrect are not the same thing. They're the same thing numbers wise in your percentage, but it's a different response. It's either the student completely didn't know how to do it or they needed a little help. But again, it depends on how, that's why those topographies defining what the skill is that you want is so important because it informs how you take the data. And for us too, on that same point, a trial is the direction is delivered once. You can't keep saying, say apple, say apple, say apple, say apple. So that it's one delivery of the instruction. So say apple, something happens. There's either an incorrect response, a correct response, or a prompted response. And then you have to close out the trial. Good job. That is one data point. So that's one plus, minus, or prompt.
And so I know we're just in case we're thinking we're only talking behaviorally in terms of how we clarify whether or not the prompt is counted. In the context of academic goals or functional goals, it should be spelled out in the goals that the student is or is not given a prompt. So really reference those IEP goals if you're looking for clarification on that, and or ask your teachers if they are including a prompt in these goals. And then keep referencing that because sometimes we forget, and sometimes the benchmarks change. So by the third benchmark, there may be no prompt, but you didn't know. So definitely always reference those goals to indicate the level of prompting.
I think we have time for about one more question. I'm confused on when to start the timer for latency data collection because I don't know when the behavior would start. Do I start the timer every time the lesson begins until a behavior happens?
That's another really good question. So for latency data, you don't start it when the behavior starts. That would be duration. So latency, you start when the instruction starts. So if you want the latency, you ask specifically, do I start it when the lesson starts? If you were giving the latency for attending to an entire lesson, then yes, you would. But normally it's like, go pick up the pencil you just drew, or go pick up the pencil, or go get a pencil. How long does it take the student once you say that to go get the pencil and finish the behavior? So you start the timer after the delivery of the instruction, and the timer goes until the actual behavior or skill you want is completed. So it's different than duration. It's a time also, but it's a little bit of reframing for yourself. And we're going to show on the next slide our emails. And I have some visuals and some other supports that I can give you if you want to email me about that, because it's a fine distinction.
And there was a question regarding data sheets. If you have any available, maybe individuals who are participating can email you, and if you have any, you can forward to them.
Yeah, we have a lot. Ours are all electronic now, but we, in our, both Edward and I, in our plethora of files on our computers. If you let us know the skill that you're trying to target, we can certainly provide data sheets. I just want to preface it with like, please ask your teacher and your BCBA and your school psychologist before you start using it. I don't want to be disrespectful to anyone else's programming.
We don't want to get in trouble with your teachers.
Yeah.
All right, we are right at 1:59. So thank you so much, Malara and Edward, for highlighting the importance of data collection in our work supporting students. Please be sure to join us on March 11th for social emotional supports, also presented by Malara and Edward. And on April 8th and May 13th, we'll be joined by Katie Novak, an international expert on universal design for learning. So that's not to be missed either. Thank you all for participating in this webinar series, as well as the incredible work you're doing on a daily basis in this trying times. So have a fantastic weekend, and we look forward to seeing you next month. Sorry.